let's leave them for a second.
Green would be go.
I think red is for record. But if they're still not going.
Okay, I'll go to red.
You don't even get one, Larry.
I have one. No, that's okay. I'm just kidding. We're good here.
You really want one.
We're gonna share.
During the
We're gonna do
pandemic,
troubleshooting.
during the pandemic, I got a bunch of.
Testing.
We'd have people, we'd have a few people in the room, we could take like 6 people in the room, and then everybody else on. And you could get the people in the room to understand it. You can't have a sidebar conversation. Everybody online. Like, no, it would just disrupt the whole.
There it is.
Mute when you're not talking.
All right, friends. For some reason, those microphones aren't working for us. We're gonna go back to the dais if you don't mind moving.
Hey, we get to go to the big table.
You guys do.
It's
like Thanksgiving dinner. We finally graduated.
You know, we were talking about those things that was when we first came out, those were nice.
Right? We didn't know what else to do, you know, and so we're having all these virtual meetings, and some people were hell-bent on showing up in person, and then they wanted, you know, so we had these little microphones like those, but you'd have 2 people having a sidebar over here, and then everybody else virtual, and all they could hear was 2 people talking.
Yeah, our people have
Yeah.
Or the dog barking.
Yeah, we'll leave them. We don't have to worry about that.
Is there Wi-Fi that I can?
I can't see right now.
Oops, there's my purse. I'll look at that for now. Oh, jeez, this is a low chair. Thanks for catching that, Greg.
Gotta do this over.
Yeah, he was just kind of giving me one of these, like.
This is a weird chair. Is yours low? Mine feels really low.
It can be.
On the side, there's
Well, he's like the president. His is 3 inches taller than everybody else.
That's right.
That's how that works, right?
I did at a board meeting once. They stood in, and I was playing a chair, and all of a sudden, my head was this far above the table. I felt so dumb.
Well,
Wait for the signal again.
all right, give it another go.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Today, we're having our Park and Recreation Committee meeting. It's June 17th. We'll first do a roll call.
Greg McCurry.
Terry Coe.
Larry Schultz.
Mary Larson.
Amanda Cahill.
Jacob Paul.
Alyssa Swanson, and thanks everyone at home for the slight delay.
And Jenna Smith.
Okay. Well, welcome, everyone. Next item on the agenda would be the approval of the minutes from the last meeting of May 20th, 2024. So everybody had a chance to review those.
Yes.
If so, is motion in order to approve those?
I motion to approve.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carried. Next, petitions, proclamations, suggestions, complaints from citizens, committee members, or staff. I don't see anybody in the audience. Does anybody on the committee have anything they would like to bring forward, or something they've heard from somebody that they'd like to bring forward?
Nope, not this week.
Okay, if not, we'll move right along to, there's no old business.
Chair, we do have a few updates from staff.
Okay, all right.
Just a few.
Okay, we will do that.
Perfect. So on the screen, we have a few projects related to the recreation center. The first one is the painting project that's happening in the city managed spaces in the Victoria Recreation Center. That project was brought to you guys last month, just as a more or less an update regarding maintenance related to that space. So the multi-purpose room is complete, your office is complete, and they're currently working on the fitness center. So that's going to be a couple weeks out, and then the lobby is our final area as well as hallways. But do you have any other?
Yep, lower level bathrooms are also complete, and they are about halfway done through the fitness center. So hopefully that will continue on pretty quickly, but they are on track, and the areas that have been completed are looking a lot nicer. So we're excited for the completion of the project.
Great.
And then the other one is a sidewalk repair. So if you've been to the recreation center and entered in through the eastern entrance, so more or less what people know as the back entrance to the recreation center, there's multiple places where the sidewalk is in disrepair to a point where it needs to get completely ripped out and replaced. So that is something else we're getting on the schedule to completely redo that entire back area. That includes the entrance by the multi-purpose room. There's a sidewalk that goes into that area. There's an emergency exit on that side of the building too that also needs to be ripped up. The vestibule where people enter into the space, and then there's another vestibule closer to the pickleball courts that would also need to be replaced as part of that project. So right now we're just looking at schedules, timelines, and then hopefully get more information related to that to the public soon. But I wanted to bring that forward as just an update to this committee.
And I saw on the website that the pickleball courts will remain open. We just have to access them on the east entrance. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
That will be the largest impact to that space. And speaking of pickleball courts, there are sound barriers that are going to be going up onto the north side of the pickleball courts as well as the east side of the pickleball courts. This was a direction from City Council during budget season last year as the neighborhood that's surrounding Dedome Park had complaints about noise. So through research and through the petition recommendation, sound barriers were the ultimate choice for a solution. So they're going to be installed hopefully next week, weather dependent. And if we don't need to close the courts for that, it should remain open. Public Works will be installing on the exterior, and hopefully will help the neighborhood be a little bit quieter in the mornings and evenings through this project install. So
Will you be able to use the screens that are currently up and move them to the south side?
that will depend based on how the grommets will be placed on there, but that is something that we should look into.
Okay. And I know another thing that I'm hearing a lot from the pickleball players is that they wish there was an opening on the west side so that they could see. So the southwest court, it would be where the saddle is hung. Maybe having that panel actually come down, or a section of it come down, so that there is a space for people to actually see in the courts and see when there's people coming on and off. The courts are opening up. So I don't know if that's been talked about, or as long as we're doing something on the screens, this might be an opportunity.
Not too much from staff, but we can take a look to see what we can do on that. I think that one is connected to the other side, the south side of that space too, but we would have to look at it to see what we can do.
Okay.
Anything else?
All we had, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving right along, new business. Tonight, we were gonna have a discussion on how do we engage the public regarding park projects. So Alyssa or Jen, one of you gonna lead us off on the discussion?
Thank you again, Chair. We're going to tag team this one, but really, ultimately, we're going to leave this open to the committee. Hence the reason we started off on more of an informal shoe-like system, but then eventually our microphones didn't work, so hence the reason we're back up here. But what we wanted to talk about is related to the 2024 work plan, the item that talks about public engagement within our park system. Obviously, this is something we talked a lot about in the 2023 year as we were developing the work plan and just even identifying the future of the committee. And we obviously know through some heartburn related to Deer Run 1 Park that this is an important piece to being in Victoria, and it's an important piece to our residents too, to make sure that they're engaged into the process of what goes on in their own neighborhoods and within the entire park system in its sense. This is also just unrelated to public engagement and communication in general, a huge priority for City Council, and it has been over the last few years. So they're really excited about this project to really bring Victoria forward and really have us be the leaders in public engagement in regarding the park spaces. And I'll get into one of the ways that they're hoping to help this committee be more forward-facing when it comes to engaging in parks and what the future of the park system is. So historically, and we linked a past survey in the staff report, historically the city has done surveys surveying the neighborhood when it comes to new park projects specific to a specific neighborhood space. That is one piece to what we're going to be discussing here. We obviously, in part of the work plan, talk about new park projects, and I think that's one avenue, is those newer developments. How do we want to ensure that we're knowing what the community's needs are in that larger sense, even though there might not be any surrounding houses or people in those houses by the time we're installing those parks. But then also those remodel park projects, or at least that's what we're calling them. If there's equipment that needs to be replaced, or if there's something that desperately needs to happen to that park, or if we're just hearing a lot of complaints that there's nothing there, how do we address that? And how do we reach out to the public and the neighborhood to say, okay, we need to think about what does that space look like in the future, and how do we go about doing that? So it's really a twofold conversation. But historically, we've really been engaging on those remodel projects for small neighborhood parks with a survey, typically done digitally and mailed out. And I provided a copy of that in the staff report. It was a really short survey, a couple of questions of what people were looking for. And that survey that we looked at on there was related to the state Lakeside Estates 2 park project. And as also noted in the staff report and things that we've talked about in the work plan conversations, is that sometimes those surveys or those recommendations that were brought from citizens were happening after the fact as budgets were decided. So part of this conversation is making sure that we're flipping that, we're getting ahead, we know we're doing the survey work, whatever that public engagement might be, and that leads into helping build the budget or building the recommendations for the future budgets. So that's also part of this conversation too.
So regarding that and timing, you know, if you're gonna do it before the budget, are we talking like a year? We've had a system in the past that look at different parks, you know, and I don't know if that's what we're gonna continue or not, but you know, that, okay, it's Deer Run 2's time, or it's, you know, whatever park, it doesn't matter, you know, coming forward, that's gonna be next year's. So are we talking about maybe a year in advance, talking about, hey, your park's coming up for replacement, let's have the discussion before the budget? Or is that what you're?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something we start well in advance. So let's take Deer Run 1. It was budgeted for 2023. The prior idea was to engage the public during 2023, where if we would do it today, or in our preference, we would start engagement in 2022 for construction in 2023, or even earlier, depending on how big the project is, in 2021.
Okay, here's another question for that. You know, the one, I agree that if you should plan and then build your budget after that, as opposed to budgeting and then trying to shoehorn something in. So that makes sense to me. Also, I think it would be, if we're going to the public, and we're going out there and they're coming up with, you know, all these, we have $50,000 typically budgeted, and they're coming up with stuff that's gonna cost $560,000. It might be helpful to kind of know some parameters, so we can kind of say, hey, you know, we have some leeway here, but typically we spend X number of dollars, and we can go over that or under that depending on what the needs are. But you know, to set a realistic expectation too. I mean, how do we do that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something with wording of, if we decide to go survey route, wording of surveys. And we'll get into like potential options that we've seen and options that, you know, staff we would like to potentially see as well, based on the committee's reaction to the thoughts and ideas. But making sure that we're having that honest conversation, as well as just making sure that the surveys are written in a way that's not saying that we're building an outdoor swimming pool in, you know, a small neighborhood park. We're looking at potential options that would fit within the space, within parameters of a budget, but also making sure that we're not putting in a basketball court when no one wants a basketball court. They might want a tennis court or baseball field or soccer field or something that's equivalent. But that is a great point. As we move forward with this, I think that's something we have to make sure we keep it top of mind.
So, anybody have comments, or do you have suggestions as to what other communities might be doing?
Yeah, and obviously I'm going to lean on Jenna too, because she has a lot of expertise in this field. But from our market cities or surrounding cities, typically what you find is surveys. That's pretty well the standard practice, which is not a bad thing. And I think there's absolutely reason to do surveys specifically in this type of work. I think it's a great way to gauge the community and specifically a smaller neighborhood's feel of what they might want in the space. However, we also have heard from City Council that this is something that they really want us to improve upon. Just public engagement overall, not just in the Parks Department, but in the city in general. And that's the reason they hired our first communications person in 2020 and our second one last year, is to really beef up our two-way communication with residents. Obviously, it's easy to do one way, posting on social media, sending out newsletters, what have you, but making sure that we're really talking to the residents and also talking to them in person. It's so much easier to have a conversation when you're with people in front of them than trying to email or take a phone call or whatever have you, the traditional forms of communication. So other ways that we've seen or heard from communities that are also looking at this or have done things in the past is related to pop-up events or just focus groups. And focus groups are really what we've found for those larger community parks. And that's something we'll talk about in a second as well, is that, we're talking about remodeling of parks. There's the small neighborhood parks. It might be easier to do a survey and maybe a pop-up event. But for Lions Park, Beatone Park, you're not going to get as much results looking at neighborhoods that might need a little bit more information, more of a master plan related to that. And I think that's a whole other avenue that we have to explore on how do you engage the community on something that touches every single member or resident that lives here. But related to pop-up events, something that the City Council approved the purchase of this year, and this is just an example, but very similar to what will be coming to Victoria, I believe this fall, is a city engagement trailer. And we won't have a tap on it, as the picture shows it. We're not that exciting.
Well, if you really want to engage.
I know. We're gonna have a line at our trailer for the first time ever. But you may have seen our pop-up tents at various events, which are great, and we'll obviously continue to utilize that resource as much as we can. But the thought process is providing this trailer is to, one, be a mobile city hall as much as we can, and be out at the classic car shows and to the baseball games and just have it be out there and answer people's questions and tailor it to different projects that are going on. We have the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan transportation projects that are coming this way, and making sure people are aware, they're understanding, they can get their questions answered. Our city engineer can be right there. We can ask people how to go through a roundabout. We have a roundabout activity that we have people do with little cars. At our truck rodeo, having something like this and having people just sit and provide feedback. And then when it comes to park projects, this could be an opportunity for this committee to leverage too when it comes to, well, I'm gonna keep using Deer Run 1 as a great example of, we could plop this in the parking lot and just tell the neighborhood communities, invite them to come and meet their committee members and Parks and Rec staff and talk about what they want for this park to be. Because we do have this new tool that we can utilize, and it might be able for us to, one, understand what that neighborhood might want or the community might want, but then also help talk to them about how do you even go through a park project? Where's the money come from? What's the budget look like? What could we potentially put here? And just have more of that open dialogue, that it becomes, one, an engagement, we're listening, we're getting feedback, but also an educational session as well. So we're teaching the community about how these processes work and why they work. So this is something that we just wanted to share with you because it is something that's coming our way and an absolute opportunity for us to utilize as we're thinking, what is the future of engagement potentially be past surveys?
Yeah, and effective strategies that has been utilized in other communities typically draws from the concept of surveys and any sort of listening sessions where potentially people have to come to you. It tends to be a big barrier for people because people have busy schedules, they have kids, they can't meet the accommodations in order to be able to get to you. So an idea with these pop-up events and things like that where we are actually coming to them is we're making it more accessible to be able to share opinions, to be able to provide feedback in a setting that is neutral, that feels comfortable for them. It's a space that we're already talking about, and so they're able to see the things that need improvement, kind of envisioning the space, things like that. So a lot of times when we're at these types of events, it creates the ability to have those honest dialogues, authentic conversations, And so a lot of the things that are effective are those, like Alyssa had already talked about, those authentic conversations where people can get real-time feedback. And if they do have questions, because a survey could express, we have this much money to allocate to this area, but that might not make a lot of sense to somebody who isn't quite experienced with working with that type of money or that type of space or things like that. And so those pop-up events really help improve the dialogue so that we can provide quick explanations for it. Surveys do help if we get people to fill them out, which I had mentioned casually before. Depending upon the types of feedback, the types of responses that we get from surveys are typically coming from people who are already engaged, but they're people that are willing to share honest feedback, things like that. And so there's a lot of strategy in how we choose the questions that are on the surveys in order to solicit some of that feedback, and how we structure some of those questions would tackle some of the parameter aspects, because we can structure some of the questions to list, if you had X amount of dollars to spend, how would you allocate your money? And so questions like that can be created into surveys so that they can kind of have an understanding of the money's going to run out eventually, so we can't dream quite as big as maybe some people might have, because we do have limitations, but some of those can be structured in a way that allows people to dream within the confines of what we have to offer.
I think one of the things in some of the earlier years that I was on this committee that we struggled when the survey was done, I don't know who the survey all went to, how many people, but you end up with 10 responses and 8 people want, a ball field or a tennis court. And it's just a fraction of the people that live in that area. And I suppose governments, it's those who show up decide things, I mean, to a certain extent, but it's kind of hard from a committee standpoint to see that and know that, well, there's 8 people that have a passion for, softball or tennis, and they're the only ones that show up, and then you end up doing that, and then everybody else starts complaining about, well, there's only a few people that use this. How come we didn't have X, Y, Z? So I think it's important that whatever we decide, that we have, multiple ways of providing input, and that we talk about the process ahead of time and set realistic expectations. So, because at the end of the day, maybe if, using my example of 8 people wanted a field out of 300 people that got families that got the survey, we as a committee might decide, we've maybe heard other things, or somebody contacted you separately or whatever, that may or may not be the best thing, and we don't want to have those 8 people say, well, you never listened to us type thing, which I've seen happen before too. So I think it's going to be real important to not only have the engagement, but to have open communication ahead of time to set the expectations of what we're doing. We can't say it enough times. And then if people don't show up, don't speak up, that's their problem.
You mentioned Deer Park 1. Could you speak to some of the feedback or whatever's happened there that we might have liked to capture in engagement ahead of time?
Yeah, I think that was one of the parks that happened. Well, it was one of the parks that happened during the transition of staff. And as part of that, the budget was already set to replace that playground on site. So as staff, we took the opportunity to receive a grant for that project to help actually pay for what it would cost to do a playground. It was quite under budget for what was previously budgeted, and then put in more or less the same infrastructure that was in there. But in hindsight, I think there was opportunity, and I think we've heard from the community as well as this committee that being able to make sure that we're not just putting in what was already there, and making sure that we're taking our time to hear from that neighborhood to say, maybe we want a playground, great. That's at least confirming that we have what's in there, but then also saying maybe they didn't need that. Maybe they don't need that anymore. Maybe that neighborhood has outgrown it. There's one close by. Just listening to the community a little bit better to say, what do we actually want in that space before we go ahead and make that change.
Is there a way you've talked before about you know, there might be some amenities that we don't have in the community, or we have limited amounts of certain things. That there might be a case where it's generally considered a local neighborhood park, but maybe, I don't know, use an example, something we don't have. So a ninja course, somebody said one time. Flat splash pad, whatever, that maybe there's an opportunity, you know, to put that in one of these parks, even though that may not be the neighborhood's main thing, but it may be a community's main thing, and maybe we see that a particular park may be the place for that. Others, it wouldn't make any sense, but.
Yeah, so some of the things that we take into consideration for those, we have differentiations between like neighborhood parks versus more of like those community destinations, larger park draws. And some of the considerations that come into that are, one, actual land space for the park itself, accessibility to it. Is it only pretty much neighborhoods that can walk to it, bike to it, et cetera? If there's the ability for parking and how much parking, in comparison to how much actual land space there is. So there's a difference between like the local neighborhood, and those tend to be a little less amenities, but there's something to having accessibility in parks within certain distances of households. But if there is a situation where we have acquired a little bit larger of a land space that we have the ability to park, it's something that we can take into consideration for future planning for those locations, that we can make it more of that kind of like destination park feel, where we can have those unique amenities, something that we invest in a little bit more. But the things that have to be considered in order to make it one of those parks is the ability for people to park and the accessibility to it, whether it be through roads, trails, etc. I am all for, expanding our idea of what these parks can be, because just because a park is tucked into a neighborhood doesn't mean that it's only for the neighborhood. It's a city-run park. We maintain it. We want it to be an amenity for everyone in the city of Victoria. And so if it fits those kind of different parameters where we can allocate a little bit more dedication for money, budget, upkeep, things like that, that's something that we are looking into considering. There are obviously parameters, but those are typically the things that we consider when we're making those larger park project ideas. And I think the idea of creating those destination parks would draw more people into the community and perhaps create a wider sense of community around all of Victoria. And so typically those are what kind of differentiates the two, but there's definitely opportunity for that as we continue to either revise parks or implement and acquire new parkland.
And I think the other thing, sorry, Greg, go ahead.
No, I just wrote down a couple other things that aren't here on. I think we need to engage with the associations, be it soccer, lacrosse, baseball, softball. I think that's super important. And I have a daughter that played soccer. She's now going off to college, but we experienced parks that we didn't even know were there because there's a soccer field there. Right? And some of them were really awesome because there was a playground where my younger kids could play while I was watching the soccer game, and some of them weren't. We liked the ones with the playground right adjacent to the soccer field, so I could send the little kids over there and I could still watch my older one play. But I think speaking with the associations on, can games be dispersed throughout the community even more than they maybe are today, right? So where people on a team would experience a park they otherwise wouldn't probably go to because, there's one field there. It doesn't always have to be a complex of 20 fields or 4 baseball diamonds all, in that configuration. I think there's a chance to have people get more out into the community when there's a field that's available, maybe at just one of the neighborhood parks. And it adds vibrancy, I think, to the neighborhood too when there's activity happening. And the park there's kids running around and there's a game happening. When you think about, to me, Little League baseball, I grew up playing Little League in a neighborhood park that I walked to 2 blocks from my house. That's where our games were, right? But there were fields all over town, but that was where our home field was for our little team, right? So I think there's an important conversation to have there with the associations and, you know, I don't know what that looks like or what the demand is today for field space and all that, but I don't think it always has to be right outside the rec center. And, you know, all these fields just one and, but I know that dispersing adds its own issues too because of maintenance, and you have to then be, you know, moving your stuff around and marking lines and all that, but I think that there's some important groups there to engage with, which could help, you know, get more responses to surveys, especially if those groups, they have an audience, right? And so how do we work through those groups to get to those audiences of people that are involved in different athletic associations?
It's a great point. Just making sure that we're talking to all of our park users.
Mm-hmm.
To go back to your question, Larry, and you mentioned a ninja course, so I just, as I was thinking through that question, I think there's also something if we listen to people on a one-on-one conversation or that dialogue of meeting where they're at, we might be able to pick up some additional information that you might not get related to a survey. Like people might talk about different elements of play, but they might not use that terminology. So you might be able to pick up, someone says a ninja course, someone says a toddler playground, someone says they're looking for this type of thing, but ultimately they're looking for play equipment for their children. And that could look any which way of the form. And we could provide different types of that play equipment in different ways. It might not be traditional, so it's fun and it's different in its own way. It might not be, the tower with the slide that we can buy from, Game Time or whoever any of those corporations are, but it could be something different, deconstructed elements of play that fit the entire neighborhood's needs. So that's something we could pick up in a conversation that we might not always pick up in a survey. They might just say, I want a playground, period, and not understand that they just really want their kids to have something to play and recreate on. But that aside.
And some of it may be as simple as people want picnic tables or, and I think we need to look beyond just the kids as, maybe a place where adults can gather. We have some of those, but do we market them? Do we have activities for adults outside of the major areas? And I don't have any idea what those are, but I think if we want to engage the whole community and get them involved, a lot of them use trails, I understand that. It seems like Lions Park gets used quite a bit by adults. But are there other opportunities, or is there a need? Maybe there's not a need, but we don't know that unless we try something different.
Going back to the distribution, I know you mentioned email and mail surveys. I don't know if we've tried this, but putting up a sign in the park with a QR code that you can scan while you're sitting there thinking about it might be.
Yep, so that's something that we've already talked with our communications department about whenever we do roll out future surveys and things like that, is utilizing technology and making it more accessible to people who have a cell phone, which is most people. And so having the ability to just scan it, whether it's, something that's posted up at a park, whether it's at an engagement event where we have our QR posted up behind us that they can do it real quick on their phone. The goal with that would be make it accessible, make it easy. And I fully agree with you. And we have already talked to staff about creating those QR codes. So wonderful idea. I love it.
Great.
One thing I went back, I pulled up the survey that we did with the Lakeside Estates Park in November of 22. And I went back to our minutes and kind of our history of that park. And we had already done an RFP for that park by the time we sent that survey out. So we kind of had our train backwards as far as how we were soliciting for advice. And even the letter that was sent out to the community said that we have a general concept, but we're taking the opportunity to ask the community what other things you would like. Well, they told us what they'd like, and not a single thing that they mentioned, those 11 people, got added because we were so far down the pipeline with the vision for this park that there really wasn't a way to kind of incorporate any of those others and kind of still stay in budget. So I can't help but think about, how do those people feel about, I did your survey, we all did the survey, none of those suggestions came to fruition. So if we do surveys, I think we have to be mindful about what are we going to do with that. Are we going to we gonna use those suggestions? How do we, I'm not articulating this the way I want to, but when we ask for people's input, we have to be prepared for going back to them and saying why we did or did not put in what they asked for, especially when you're talking about a community, neighborhood park. And there'll be a million of suggestions, right? Like there was with Lakeside Estates. There were a lot of suggestions from pump track to pickleball, which are very loud things to put in right behind those houses that were literally 50 feet from the park. So those would not have been good options for people who are living right next to it. But so those would be good things. Well, that's not a really good thing to put right behind these houses because they're loud. But how do you give feedback to people about, that's a great idea for a park, maybe not this park, kind of thing, so that they understand why we would make choices. I don't know. If we had a million responses, it'd be hard to go back. But I think sometimes going back to people and saying why, that's a really great idea. We're keeping in mind, but this park is not the right place for something like that. I don't know. I'm just trying to think out loud about how do we be cautious about asking for feedback, and then what do we do with that? Because it's hard to have community members feel let down when they gave feedback and then nothing's done with it.
Absolutely, and I can completely understand where you're coming from with that. And I think one thing, when I solicit feedback, transparency is really big for me. And so in a situation like that, especially if, let's say in your example, a lot of people wanted a pump track, but we know that the proximity to the spaces and things like that would not be doable in that type of an area, but the feedback we showed was heavily interested. That would be a time in which I feel like that would be a public engagement opportunity at our pop-up events or things like that, maybe on our social media accounts, things like that, to try to engage with the public to explain parameters as to why. And this, I think, kind of goes back to some of your even budgetary parameters of like transparency in we can do this, we can't do this, we love this idea, let's try to find another space in our community to build on that in the future, but this is not the right space. So I completely understand where you're coming from and agree that there needs to be a level of transparency when we provide or are requesting engagement from our community members so that they know that your opinion is valid, it's fair, and it's valuable for where we're going. And then just explaining why it might not be doable here, but we're going to add it to the list of somebody's requesting this for a future development.
Can you be so clear on a survey to say, for this park, these are the type of amenities we cannot, like at the top, like understanding the spaces, the parking, all of the considerations, like these are the considerations we take into account for this park. We cannot do this and this and this. However, in your survey, please let us know, how you would prioritize these things that we can do. Because then I feel like you are going to get someone to understand, like, oh, if it's, the space is the size for a tot lot, oh, we can't put up, the highest, the play equipment meant for up to 12-year-olds or whatever it might be.
Your space constraints.
Yeah.
Noise constraints.
Noise constraint, yeah, like,
Yeah, any of those kinds of
like
things.
we are already taking into consideration, these things. We would love your feedback on these things that we can do.
Or can we, piggybacking on that, maybe it's a two-part process. Maybe it's open-ended to start with, and then go back again to the community. I mean, I don't think we want to shut off ideas that may be appropriate for other places, as Jenna was speaking of earlier, like the pump track thing. So maybe it's a two-part process. We kind of just open it up to start with, and then get back to them what we can't do, and then take the things that they came up with and do what you say and prioritize those. So use two steps instead of just one survey. Actually, it's kind of almost a two-part process. I know exactly what you're saying, but sometimes it might be hard to rule out we can't do all these things as opposed to.
I would agree with you, though. There has to be some parameters around us.
Yeah, like if it's this survey for a neighborhood park and it's going to, not like a general community survey, but like it's going just to these people in this geographic area around the park, then I think it would make sense in how I think through things, like, okay, this is for this park project planned for, summer of 2026. And like, can look ahead to that and not feel like, oh, well, my one envision like of, more, garden plots, oh, since it can't be at my park, if it's right there on there, like, oh, we understand, people in our community have expressed a desire for additional garden plots. However, there's not space at this park for garden plots, et cetera, et cetera. We'd love your feedback on what can fit in like these parameters. Because then I'd say like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll do some more research as to where garden plots are at, if they can't be in my neighborhood park.
I could add a follow-up question to the one with parameters to say, oh, if you had a wish list, or if you didn't have parameters, what would be on your wish list?
That's for
That could end up
Victoria in general.
Yeah, or I think there could be two questions, one for like a ranked choice list of things that you like to see in your local park and things that you'd like to see in the city. And they could be bigger things in the city list, because they might not go in your local park.
Then you could capture the ideas, Larry.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I know exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
But I think you don't want to miss the opportunity to hear what those other things are.
Yeah.
And I guess what I hear everybody saying is, when we do a survey, let's be cognizant of expectations that we might be setting, and we aren't setting them unrealistically to end up with a lot of unhappy people because they think we're not listening to them. But I did really like what you said, Jenna, about the opportunity to being transparent and getting back to people and saying, hey, thanks for your great idea about the pump track, but this park isn't really set up for that. There may be some other places in the city or other opportunities. We're going to put it on the list. That doesn't mean we're going to do it, but we're going to listen to what we hear from other members of our community, and that's going to be, at least the Park and Rec Committee will be considering this in light of the entire community, if it makes sense.
Absolutely. And in light of everything that I said, I do think that there's a way to structure any request for feedback to be transparent, set up some parameters, like set up limitations of what each space could provide, potentially even listing out, please be aware, due to the proximity of houses nearby this park, any, activity or piece of equipment that would solicit large volumes of sound might not be suitable for this area. So in that sense, it doesn't necessarily rule out one thing or the other, but it helps people kind of be aware of things that they're putting in, be like, okay, pickleball, that's really loud. Maybe I don't want that when it's a neighborhood park that's right behind someone else's house. So it might cause them to be aware of that while not squashing kind of the creativity that I feel like you're trying to not stop people from having. Because I love people come up with things that I don't think of, and I think it's wonderful that people have different ways of recreating. And so I don't want to write something in such a way that's going to prevent somebody from being creative and share an idea of something that they've experienced elsewhere. But I do think there's a way to mindfully write that in a way that's going to set up those correct parameters so that we aren't setting false expectations for what a space could be used for. So, great points.
One other thing I wanted to bring up that I wrote down here is I really believe our world is overly groomed. I think we mow way too much. I think parks don't necessarily have to mean sports or ball fields. And we mow like curb to curb, wall to wall, like all over the place, right? And I just think it's like a little, I wonder what we can do or how you could ask questions around, like, do parks have to be mowed fence post to fence post? Or are there ways that we can make the parks more natural, right? You're seeing it happen at golf courses, right? Where they're becoming less groomed, right? I just think there maybe is something around that, because for me, it's more like the trail system, things like that. It's not really about a perfectly manicured grassy knoll in the park, right? Like, I think maybe there's something around some of these neighborhood parks that can have more native flowers and plantings, vegetation, things like that, that aren't like we're going out and plugging little flowers in around the sign in the park every year, you know? I just think that should be part of the conversation.
Is that an aesthetic benefit, or what would the benefit be to the?
To just more natural areas.
Oh, gotcha.
I mean, I think you attract more wildlife, more, you know, the butterflies, the bees, the whole thing. I mean, I'm trying to do that at my cabin a little bit too, where we just have taken out the grass next to the cabin and planted back just kind of native. I don't know, there's some name for it, but it's like whatever is on the edge of the forest, right? And there's seed mixes you can get, and you throw it down, and it's mowed once a year. So there's less maintenance, it's better for erosion control, it's better for the environment, and it doesn't look like the fairway at Augusta with a bunch of water being pumped onto it and all that stuff. So I don't know, just something I think should be a part of the discussion with neighborhoods.
Absolutely, thank you for that feedback. Natural areas, or more those passive parks, are part of the conversation. So we are looking into revitalizing some of those areas to incorporate some of that. So some of our parks do have a little bit more of that unmanicured area. There might be bits and pieces, like Wasserman has a little bit more of that natural area. We've got more natural play elements on that one versus the more groomed stuff. So there might be spots of it, but I definitely hear and support the idea of incorporating more of our natural elements into some of our park locations.
We're looking at that on a city facility side as well. Terry, just to answer your question on benefit, in addition to wildlife, eco-friendliness, pollinators, it also is a significant resource, lowering of tax dollars as well, just in the amount of staff time it takes to mow, fuel it takes to mow, the wear and tear it takes on the equipment. But then also on a level of irrigation as well. We've been in droughts the last 3 years, although this year might break out of that with the rain we're getting this year. But we also have to water a lot of those areas to make sure that they're in tip-top shape. So on a level of just reducing taxpayer resources, having more of a low-maintenance, pollinator-esque native grass plantings would reduce costs significantly in certain areas. And like I said, we're looking at that at city facilities as well, just areas that, you know, we can have less grass, more natural plantings, because they're not necessarily being used, they're just there to look pretty.
We, just as a follow-up to that, the healthcare organization I worked for, somebody donated a land for a park and to the hospital. I know they did it at the hospital, not to the city, but that's what they did. And so we had a conversation with neighbors, and they decided they wanted a butterfly park. So it was kind of natural thing. They put several benches in there, and people, I know our employees would go out there and, you know, have lunch on the bench in the park and watch the birds and the butterflies and the bees, and they had a good time. So, and the neighbors loved it. They'd be in there. It wasn't a huge area, but it was big enough to have neighbors go in there. And then somebody actually started planting some flowers along the edges, and neighbors taking care of it, because it was well used. So I like that idea.
Yeah, I just think there's an opportunity there for savings and beautification, and if it's not being utilized to play a baseball game or soccer or lacrosse or something like that, is there a way we can cut down on the mowing and the water usage and kind of return it back to where, you know, what the land would have more been like?
Other comments, thoughts, ideas, suggestions?
We did have some additional questions to throw out there for you, whether we need to answer these today or not, or whether we need to answer them at all based on the conversations we've already had. But just on the level, or the question of what levels should they be related to engagement, making sure that as staff we're not missing anything. Really the big three areas we identified were new development park projects, which I think the work plan already identified. But then breaking that remodel into two separate groups, the neighborhood park projects and then those larger community park projects, understanding that some have larger touch points than others and making sure that we're adjusting our engagement based on that. How to engage the public related to the park projects, I think we've had a lot of conversation, great conversation on that. And then knowing the last question that trailer is coming to fruition, what opportunities are there for us to leverage that when it comes to this topic?
I have a question. Right now, what would you consider our community parks?
Right now, and then we do have a list, I'm just trying to pull it off at the top of my head. Lions, Wasserman is a semi, I think we also qualify it as a natural park, but it is that larger community aspect of regional impact. D-Town, trying to think if I'm missing any. Bayfront, Kirklocken. Like, I wouldn't know if we would qualify it as a community park, but it's definitely not necessarily what we would consider a neighborhood park either, because it has a larger touch point. There's about 5 different criteria we go with. There's community parks, urban parks, which is Bayfront, regional parks, natural parks, 6, and then neighborhood parks, but we break those into 2, into smaller and larger neighborhoods. Again, going back to Deer Run, when we're looking at neighborhood parks, you have the larger Deer Run 1, parking lot, a couple more amenities, smaller Deer Run 2, tot lot, and no parking. You pretty much access it by foot or by bike.
What would be like Madeline Creek Park?
That would be a larger neighborhood.
So it's kind of a hybrid. It's
Yep.
big enough you could do some community things, but like your idea, soccer field or something, they have a couple games there, flag football or whatever. Softball, there's a diamond there.
And then it would, typically those parks, although Madeline Creek is not necessarily adequate to our standard of having parking at that location, but I think we would do it again, we'd have parking. We could also add, additional amenities to that space and do something different with the play equipment there. It might not be a community park where it has a ninja course, but it has some sort of element of play, so you could put it in that park because there is access to it, or something else that might be a little different, differentiate it from the other neighborhood parks. So then, as Jenna was mentioning, you almost create this sense of community where people are traveling to different neighborhood parks, those larger ones, to go and visit, these different play amenities that are in there. And that's not related to playgrounds, but just on a level of soccer and t-ball and whatever else that drives people there.
So anybody have any more suggestions? There's been some really good ideas come up here. Anybody have anything else for the first question on what level should there be engagement for? Or then how to engage the public? We talked quite a bit about that. Any other suggestions there before we get into the final question?
Before we hop in, is there anything that we're missing? Obviously, we had some ideas already brought to you. Obviously, we have what we know, but is there anything that you may have heard or you have maybe thought of that we haven't necessarily talked about, that hasn't been on the screen already?
I guess the one thing, and it ties to a bigger picture, and maybe it's beyond this conversation, but what is our vision for our parks? If we have a vision and here are principles, then you can use that also as a prelude to a survey. Here's the vision for parks in our community. Here's the values. It should be available to everybody, whatever those, whatever our values would be. And then, to me, then when ideas come up, you can point to your vision and to your values and say, hey, this it doesn't really fit our values to allow cannabis in this park or any park.
We had that discussion.
Yeah, we did.
Kind of like this table situation.
But I mean that's just an example or whatever. I mean, it can be a lot of different things, and that way, it's easier for this group to make decisions if those things have already been defined, because that's always the first question we should ask is, how does this proposal, does this meet the vision for our parks? And if the answer is no, then we're done. As opposed to spending a lot of time going through it and wringing our hands and then coming to the same conclusion later, or saying no after somebody's brought it forward.
Don't you think that same thing helps with the discussion of new developments when a sketch plot comes before us and we say, no, that's, no, we'd like to see more of this. It's kind of, it does help it already be laid out, because if you have we want it to meet these 3 or 4 things in wherever the new development is going, then you're consistent too. So you're not just every different one that comes before us gets kind of a different slant, right? So I agree with that.
In terms of the levels, the one that comes to mind for me that all of the examples that are listed here are all like a park project. So there's like a specific idea for where or what is going to happen already. Not as much about like just like ongoing. And I don't know what the best way to do that is, but I think using these surveys to maybe ask people like, do you want to receive updates about park projects in the future? And then they can, and using that update channel as a way to say like, we got this feedback and we're doing this as a result or something, might help close that loop on what people are looking for.
I was gonna say too, similar on that vein is like to have a timeline out there, like public, that says, hey, these parks are up again for like 2026. And these are the improvements planned for these parks. You'll see construction, begin here in 2026, or like even future, like even if we don't have a grant yet, like, hey, we're seeking grant money for this, improvement, again, down the road. And then people can go and see those drop downs for the parks that they're interested in. And then I think it would help us too, as a committee, to really see that planned out timeline and where dollars can be allocated, each year, so that when we are budgeting and looking at the budget and assisting or whatnot, we can really dive deep into those parks well in advance, so we don't feel like we haven't really had an impact. Like we didn't have the opportunity to move that park project one way or the other. I know I use them as a reference all the time. It's just because I go and Google them. But like you can go to Eden Prairie Park and Rec, and you can go to their parks right now, and you can see like, hey, here are our natural park projects in development, and these are the bulleted things that are going to be worked on. Here's the trails, through these neighborhoods, and this is what's going to be worked on, and the impacts of those. So like neighbors could see, well, your sidewalk, your utilities might be disrupted for a bit, your sidewalk might be disrupted for a bit. And then, like I said, they had ones out there that were so far down the road that, they said like, well, we're still working through grants, for this potential project, but here's the, map of, potential impact. And, it didn't have like a feedback button right there, but I feel it was like a very straightforward, people would know what's happening in the city, what's happening in their neighborhood as it relates to all sorts of natural space and like what we look at as playground or park.
And I do have to say kudos to our communications team. We do have a very extensive project page on our city's website that actually goes through and maps out a lot of these spaces. The one thing you might not see related to parks is right now we just don't have a lot going on, and that's because we're kind of taking this pause. But absolutely, once we really start nailing down this process and identifying what park projects are coming down the the timeline, getting those up there and doing the same thing we do for all of our other projects in the city, whether it's streets or we have a fiber project that's coming up right now, making sure that it's out there, having a map for impact areas and really list that out will definitely be included as part of this process, and making sure that we're all at least providing more avenues for people to be aware. One of the things that we understand, I think just people understand in general, is that there's, you might communicate with somebody this way, but someone might not be able to see it this way. So we're always looking for different avenues to reach people, whether it's finding it on the website and people doing their individual research, trying to get flyers over at the recreation center, because that might be their touch point, or the e-digital newsletter, and anything in between, making sure we're trying to exhaust all of our sources out there to make sure we're getting as many people in the know as possible.
I think that becomes even more important now that we don't have any local newspapers, because I think that's how a lot of people found out about some things, is they saw it in the paper, they saw an article about, what's going on in the city of Victoria, and we don't have that any longer, so we need to fill in the gap and have a chance to do it the right way. So. Okay, other thoughts and ideas on the first two questions? If not, what opportunities are there to leverage the new public engagement booth or trailer? Any feedback suggestions we can give staff? I think the concept I think it's worth a try. I mean, to me, the key is going to be, how do we get people to show up? I mean, we can say we're going to have our meeting at the Madeline Creek Park. We're going to be there Monday, whatever date, and we show up and we're the only ones there, except 3 kids playing on the playground. That's a waste of resources, time, energy. But if we can, figure out how to get people to show up, maybe that tap wasn't a bad idea.
Sponsorship or thank you, right?
But I mean, there's I think it's worth a try, and I think it might be a way to get more people involved. I think sometimes people may be intimidated to come to or don't want to take time to come to a formal setting like this. So I kind of like the idea.
I think finding opportunities where people are already gathering and shoehorning yourself into that will work fairly well. Since the pandemic, our neighborhood hasn't had a neighborhood block party. I don't know if those are coming back or not, but for the first 3 years we lived here, it was great. Like, we had a big block party, and I don't know if anybody from the city ever came and handed out stuff, but I mean, there were hundreds of people there. So, or again, through this different activities associations and their meetings, can you go there? We already have a critical mass of people or a board and have discussions, I think is a good opportunity. Then you're not asking people to come show up at the park for, unless you're bringing food.
Right.
But the car show, where there's already a critical mass of people, is certainly a good opportunity, or the baseball games.
The other thing that, we're looking just in general is, and we already have these, so it would be bringing, we could bring yard games and just have it be not only just an activity that we're out there and we're talking and committee members are meeting their community and vice versa and staff, but also making it more of an activity-based, meet your neighbors.
Is there an opportunity to provide education around the recreation programs in the recreation center through the same activity, so you could market it that way too, right?
Yeah.
They come learn more about the summer activities for your kids, or could be something there.
Yeah. If we're already out there, being able to bring all of our materials out there, and that's the nice thing about the trailer versus what we have the tent is there's storage containers and storage units that are lockable in that space, so we don't have to haul it back and forth. It's in the trailer, we park it, we bring it out, we unlock it, and everything's right there. So bringing all the material that we possibly can out there, and that's just not limited to recreation too. Like I said, there's a lot of projects that are going on in the city, so if we could use that to leverage and say, hey, there's gonna be a roundabout being constructed here, and you're curious about it, let's get that answered now, rather than directing you to City Hall Monday through Friday, 8 AM to 4:30, like, let's talk about it today.
Any other thoughts or ideas?
I mean, I think you could potentially actually bring it to Victoria Elementary because, again, I agree with Greg. Where are there like critical mass of people? And mostly those at Victoria Elementary live in Victoria. And when they have their, PTO Food Truck Fridays, there's hundreds of people in attendance using park space, right? Like they are on playground, they are on softball fields playing kickball, they are on lacrosse fields playing flag football and whatnot. So I wouldn't, I would say the school would be an opportunity as well.
Yeah,
And I would
guess
say
we could push it Friday.
I would say a middle school too, but like all of our middle schools are kind of, it's not just the Victoria area, right? It's each middle school is drawing from a larger area.
And that's, we have to be a little careful with the youth athletic associations too, is that they're mixed with Chan and Chaska. So I don't want my Chan neighbors voting on something that's going to impact my taxes, you know what I mean? I really want the feedback from my Victoria residents about what they need and what they want, so.
I think that's a good point, and the role of this committee too is we're going to get a lot of feedback if we move forward with any of these ideas and plans, and it is reaching out to the focus groups, and it is getting surveys, and it is reaching out to the neighborhoods directly and getting that resident feedback face to face. And the role of this committee is to then take all that and deep dive and come out with some sort of analysis to say, council, this is our recommendation as a committee based on what we heard from the community, and we're comfortable with this.
Sounds like there's many, good suggestions and different ways to, get people involved or maybe get people to engage with a trailer booth or whatever. And part of it might be, trial by error. Maybe we try different things and it doesn't work, and we go back to square one, try something different. I don't think we should limit ourselves to one way without trying different things. Unless we do the one way and it's really successful, then we keep doing it. But I think it's a good idea to go where people are. That might be a good way to start, but I also think it might be good to just try something different, whether it's yard games or whatever might attract people to an area. Food, maybe we get somebody to help sponsor that. Whatever. So, other thoughts, ideas? I think we had some really good suggestions from the group. I guess what I'd like to see is I'd like to see staff kind of summarize what you heard and come up with a plan that we could then react to see if it's captured what we've said. So maybe we could do that one of the upcoming meetings after you've had a chance to digest this and talk this over internally, and then come back with here's the proposed plan based on what we heard from the committee. Everybody okay with that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? Any other business? If not, a motion's in order to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Adjourned. Thank you. Thanks for all the good discussion ideas.